Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we will be examining Sutta number 137 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the āyatanavibhanga Sutta, which means the... Excuse me?
It's my computer, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Trying to get the Wi-Fi.
Okay, so this is the āyatanavibhanga Sutta, which means the exposition, or even better, analysis of the Sixfold Base. But actually, as we'll see, the Sixfold Base is only the beginning point of the sutta, and it actually goes on to cover a variety of other topics. Okay, so the sutta begins when the Buddha is living in Sravasti, in Jeta's Grove, and then this is a sutta that the Buddha is going to give of his own accord, not in response to an inquiry from others, not in response to a particular situation. So he just announces to the monks that I will teach you an exposition of the Sixfold Base. Listen and attend closely, and then he goes on. He begins with, this is what we call the uddesa, the kind of outline or summary of the topics he's going to cover. And then he will go into the vibhanga, the analysis, or the nidesa, the exposition. Okay, so the uddesa, the summary, the concise teaching, the outline is the 6 internal sense bases should be understood, the 6 external sense bases should be understood, the 6 classes of consciousness should be understood, the 18 kinds of mental exploration should be understood, the 36 positions of being should be understood. Then, by depending on this, abandon that, then there are 3 foundations of mindfulness that the Noble One cultivates, cultivating which the Noble One is a teacher fit to instruct a group. Among the teachers of training, it is he that is called the incomparable or the unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed. So this is the summary, that's the uddesa. So we have this contrast. The uddesa is the summary, and that will be followed by the vibhanga, the analysis. And the analysis can also be called nidesa, That is the elaboration or exposition. So you could see how sort of methodically and systematically the Buddha is in his way of organizing his teaching. So he begins with the 6 internal bases. And here the word for the internal bases is ajatika, āyatana, and the counterpart, the external bases of bahira, āyatana. The word āyatana is used in a variety of senses within the Buddhist texts. For example, the objects of the formless meditations are called, for example, akasa ananchayatana, the base of the boundlessness of space, or viññānañcayatana, the base of the boundlessness of consciousness, nevasaññāna saññayatana, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. But here, we could see that what is meant by base, internal base and external base are, you can call these the bases for the arising of consciousness. And so, this, you could say that the focus of the Buddha's teaching, the whole focus is on the nature of conscious experience. And so the Buddha goes into a very, very extensive, elaborate analysis of the mind and mental functions, how consciousness arises, how different activities of the mind occur on the basis of consciousness. And all of this is sort of established upon 2 foundations, which are called the 2 kinds of bases. We have the internal sense bases, which are also called the doors, the internal sense bases. Actually, you could see the close connection between that English and Pali belong to the same family of languages, since the word for door here is dwara. And so the door is the particular, call it the portal or opening or base through which the mind goes out into the external world, or into the objective world, and makes contact with objects. And the door is also the portal or opening through which objects are able to enter within and become known by the mind. And so there are 6 internal bases, which are the eye base, ear base, nose base, tongue base, body base, and the mind base. And normally we would tend to think of the eye base as being simply this physical organ that we call the eye, the ear base as this thing that we call the ear. But the Buddhist, the Abhidhamma, the commentaries give a more technical explanation of what is meant by the eye base. So they speak about a particular type of matter which is not the external eyeball, but is located somewhere within the eyeball, which is sensitive to light and to color. Maybe in terms of modern physiology, we can speak of anatomy or physiology. We could call this the rods and cones in the retina. And the air base is not, by the air base is not meant this particular structure here, since if we cut this off, we could still hear. I hope so. Don't experiment on me. But what's meant by the air base is a very subtle kind of matter, someplace, deep within the inner channel of the air, which is able to receive and respond to sounds. And then the nose is not this thing that sticks out here, but a particular type of material substance, maybe way up in the nostrils, which is able to pick up odors. And so this is called, I don't think the term comes in the suttas, but it comes in the Abhidhamma, it's called pasada rupa. Which is most easily translated, well, most conveniently translated as sensitive matter. The matter within the gross sense organs, which is specifically capable of picking up, receiving the corresponding type of sense objects. Okay, and then we have the mind base, which is not to be understood as the brain or nervous system, but the mind base is always understood within the Buddhist. The mind base is actually not explained at all within the suttas. It's always just taken for granted that one understands what the Buddha is talking about. And then the commentaries based on the Abhidhamma give a rather complicated explanation. But we could understand, or I would understand the mind base as being simply the mental organ of inward reflection. And so let us say, think of the square root of 4. Okay, when you think of the square root of 4, you're not seeing anything with the eyes, you're not hearing any sounds, you're not putting oranges out on the table and trying to figure out how many, 4 oranges on the table, and trying to look at them and figure out how they turn into a square root of 4. But you are reflecting inwardly with your mind based on your understanding of what a square root means to figure out what is the square root of 4. And then, of course, you come up with a 3, right? Oh. Why is everybody laughing? Excuse me? Really? Not 4? Maybe I have to go back to it. Okay, I know, I'm just joking. Okay, so we take the mind to be what I call the object of internal reflection. But, this is a subtle point, the mind base has its own distinct class of objects, which we're going to come to, which are called dhammas. Maybe I'll take the objects first, then I'll come to this point. Okay, we have the 6 internal bases, then the 6 external bases, which are the 6 counterparts of the internal sense bases, or the objects of those sense bases, or the objects corresponding to those sense bases. And these are also called, I think the word is used in this sense a bit later than the old Nikayas, āramana. Āramana means literally that which one hangs onto, that which one depends upon. And it comes to mean the object of experience. And so corresponding to the first 5 sense bases, you could see right off the bat the natural object of those sense bases. So for the eye, there are visible forms. For the ear, there are sounds. For the nose, there's odors. The tongue, the counterpart, are tastes. And for the body, there is what's called pottabha, which we could translate as tactile objects, or the tactile sensations. Okay, then the counterpart of the mind base, the text use a word with many meanings. What is the external counterpart of the mind base? Anybody know what word? If you don't know the word, I want the Pali word. Right, very good. Dhamma. With the long A to indicate that it's a plural. So we have the word Dhamma used in so many senses in the suttas, in the sense of teach. Well, as a singular, it's the Dhamma, that is the Buddha's teaching. But Dhamma can also mean various teachings, many teachings. Then we have Dhamma as qualities, mental qualities. And here we have Dhamma used in the sense of, it's often translated as mind objects or mental objects. And so we can take the counterpart, the objective counterpart of the mind base, to be objects that are not sensory but purely mental qualities. One example mentioned is ideas, concepts, mental images, judgments, propositions, square root of 4. No, this is a serious example. That would be a purely mental object. But where it gets a little tricky and interesting is that the mind base can take as its object not only purely mental objects, but the mind base can also take objects of the 5 other senses. For example, if I look at a color chart, I could see various shades of blue. So I distinguish this shade of blue is darker, this shade of blue is lighter, this shade of blue is brighter, this shade of blue is duller. So I compare these different shades of blue. So what's going on here? The first base that's involved is the eye base, taking as object colors. But then the mind base steps in and then starts to compare the colors and distinguish them. Or when I'm speaking, okay, you hear intelligible words. I hope so. Why you laugh? I didn't praise myself and say intelligent words. Whether intelligent or not, dog bites cat, bites. Dhammas revolves around I base. Okay, it's completely unintelligent nonsense, but the words are intelligible. Now I lost track of what I was saying. Oh yeah, you're hearing me say intelligible words. Okay, what is happening? What you're just picking up with the ear base are sounds, but it's the mind base that supervenes on the activity of the ear base and then turns those sounds, those sound vibrations into meaningful words. Okay, so this is the mind base can take as its object the objects of all the other senses. Okay, so these are the 12 sense bases. And as I said, we call them ayatana bases because they are the bases for consciousness. And so in the next scheme that we have here, we have the 6 classes of consciousness which should be understood. And so here we have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body, and purely mental consciousness or mind consciousness. Okay, so the eye by itself doesn't experience anything, but the eye is just a base for forms. It's just a base or a door for forms to become accessible to consciousness. And so for each pair of internal and external sense bases, we have a corresponding type of consciousness. So we have okay, so I think the situation regarding each of the 5 types of sensory consciousness should be clear. Eye consciousness is the consciousness which is aware only of visible forms. The eye consciousness doesn't have access to sounds, odors, tastes, or tactile sensations. And so each of the other types of sensory consciousness has access only to its own respective object. Now the situation gets perhaps a little more complicated with the mind dhammas, mind objects, and mind consciousness. In fact, the problem, what is the relationship between mind and mind consciousness, became, what I say is that what is somewhat puzzling, first of all, is that in the suttas, in the Nikayas, nobody comes to the Buddha and says, Bhante, what is the relationship between mano and mano-vijnana, between mind and mind consciousness? I've always found this, even from my early days as studying Buddhism, very frustrating. Why doesn't anybody come and ask the Buddha that question? It's always just taken for granted. Monks, there are these 6 types of consciousness based upon the mind and dhammas. There arises mind consciousness. Evang Bhante, yes, Venerable Sir. Nobody says, how are they interrelated? And so this became a problem for, or at least a question for like the later generations of Buddhist savants, or maybe it was even discussed amongst the circle of the Buddha's disciples, which led to the clarification, or let's say the elaboration in the Abhidhamma system. So then, I shouldn't let the cat out of the bag. To find the details, you have to register for the Abhidhamma retreat. But actually, it almost does. We call this sutta. I would call this a pre-Abhidhamma sutta, and that it's the kind of text that functions almost as the nucleus out of which the seed out of which the Abhidhamma would have developed. And so different schools of Buddhism worked out different answers to this question on the relation of the mano to mano-vijnana. And so in the Theravada school, where they devise a scheme of 89 types of cittas, then mano becomes identified with 3 types of cittas, mano-vijnana with 76 types of cittas. But I try to see it pretty simply, to keep it pretty simple, and I think maybe the Buddha was really speaking at a more sort of direct, experiential, pragmatic level. Just think of mano as being the organ or faculty of knowing non-sensory objects, and mind consciousness is that which actually knows those non-sensory objects of consciousness. And I'm using the Pali. Okay, mind consciousness also knows the objects of the other senses, just as the mind base can objectify the objects of the other bases. So mind consciousness can know the objects of the other senses. It can know different shades of color. It can turn sounds into words. When you get, past a restaurant, that's Indian cuisine. That's Chinese cuisine. How do we know this? Just through interpreting smell. But it's not the nose consciousness that knows Indian cuisine or Turkish cuisine or Chinese cuisine. But it is the mind consciousness. And so when we take the 6 internal bases, the 6 external bases, the 6 types of consciousness, we put them all together, then we get a scheme which is not mentioned as a class here, but this is a scheme called the 18 dhatus, the 18 elements. So the 18 elements are the 6 doors or internal sense bases, the 6 objects, and the 6 classes of consciousness. Yes, 6 doors or internal sense bases, 6 objects or external sense bases, and 6 classes of consciousness. So putting them all together in a simple way, what I call the Sutta style of exposition. We call these, without bringing in the Abhidhammic analysis, we call these the 18 dhatus, the 18 elements. Okay, any questions at this point? Yes, Chris. I think she's going to hand you a microphone. Oh, here it is.
Thanks. Are any of these things things that we can actually perceive? Like, so if I see the color blue, where does that fall in? It's just an object of consciousness? This is...
Wait, I'm not sure I catch the...
So of these 18 dhatus, what are just kind of inferred to exist? And what can be apprehended directly, can be observed?
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Certainly the 6 types, the 6 objects can be, experientially apprehended. The 6 types of consciousness we can experience, reflectively. Of course, if I see a form with the eye, maybe at the moment that I'm actually seeing, then I can't simultaneously be aware of my eye consciousness. But a few moments after, I can reflect back and know that since I saw a form with the eye, that there was the eye consciousness involved in knowing the form, in seeing the form. Okay,
So that sounds kind of like an interpretation of your experience, like...
I wouldn't say it's an interpretation, but certain things can only, when they're occurring in their immediacy, they can't be known, let's say conceptually, or let's say, let me put this, on an occasion of immediate sense experience, one cannot simultaneously know the consciousness which is undergoing that experience, because that would be an act of mind. What knowing eye consciousness would be itself an act of mind consciousness, and you can't have mind consciousness and eye consciousness present simultaneously. Okay, so these other types of consciousness have to be known reflectively, but it doesn't mean that it's an interpretation, because one knows through reflection that one was immediately seeing something or immediately hearing something.
But isn't that just kind of an idea? Oh, I have eye consciousness. I mean, there are colors.
Yeah.
And then there's the thought, I have eye consciousness. I mean, how do you know that there's such a thing as consciousness which is separate from the colors themselves?
I would say that Buddhism takes it as axiomatic that the knowing or experiencing itself is the act of consciousness. So if there were just colors, then there's no knowing of the colors, because colors can't know themselves.
Okay, so but the knowing of the color, isn't that mind consciousness?
Well, it would be an act of mind consciousness which knows the color in the sense of identifies the color.
Right.
The eye consciousness just has the function of purely experiencing the bare immediacy of the color in its bare immediacy. But that which sort of determines the color and classifies the color and conceptualizes the color would be mind consciousness. Okay, Dina?
Bhante, 2 questions. One, vibhanga and bhavanga.
What?
The bhavanga. Remember in Abhidhamma,
yeah.
right? Bhavanga, Javana.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah,
The
no, that's
thought.
correct. Yeah, actually very good, yeah.
And vibhanga.
No relation at all.
No relation.
No.
Okay. Second question, thank you, is I notice that if you can't smell and you can't taste,
Yeah.
those are kind of early symptoms of Alzheimer's, right? So I'm wondering, you know, when you're missing some of these abilities to see, to smell, or hear, I'm sorry, I'm lost in my ability to frame the question, but
Anyway, you could.
what happens then to these 18, you know, what happens to your consciousness? Does it, I mean, it alters, clearly a sign that it's altering is you can't smell, you can't
Well,
taste.
let's just take the case of somebody who goes blind.
Yeah,
Okay, probably in Buddhist terminology, one would say that their sensitive matter of the eye has been damaged, so that even though the eye organ remains intact, but once the sensitive matter of the eye has been damaged, or we would say that there's been maybe some damage to the retina or to the ocular nerve, then there's no arising of eye consciousness.
and that's okay. I mean, that doesn't distort this.
I mean, the 18 elements is speaking about the, let's say, the totality of possibilities of experience. It doesn't exclude the possibility
Okay, thank
that,
you. You know, that helped me a lot. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Okay. I only want questions that actually need clarification about these points rather than, you know, questions that are somewhat off tangent. Yeah, please.
Well, it was in regards to what you just said in, well, it's based on a sutta, actually. It said some of our references are based on past. So even though we lose our sight now,
Yeah.
we can still remember what we heard or saw.
Oh, of course.
So
Yeah. But that would be purely activity of mind consciousness, probably dhammas, which would be like visual image. Dhammas could probably include visual images, memories of sounds, memories of odors, tastes, tactile sensations, which are, in this case, being apprehended by mind consciousness.
So we're still generating karma based on or mental
Yeah,
activity.
I don't want to bring karma in because at this point we're not concerned with karma. Okay, so let's move on then to the next topic. Okay, actually there's a progression taking place here. You could see it. Like now we have the 6 internal sense bases, external sense bases, consciousness, and now the next topic that's introduced are the 6 classes of contact. This is, in Pali, phassa. And in the suttas, phassa is always explained, or usually explained, as the coming together of 3 things. It uses the word sangati. Literally, it's going together. It's like coming together, concurrence, encounter of 3 things. That is the object, the sense door, and the corresponding consciousness. So what is, the text would run, independence upon the I and forms, there arises I consciousness. The coming together of the 3 is contact. For example, we get this, I remember it in Sutta number 18. Yeah, on page 203, paragraph 16. Okay, dependent on the I in forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. And we'll take the next sentence because that leads into the next section here. When with contact as condition, there is feeling. Okay, so the texts, the suttas speak about contact as simply the coming together of these three particular factors. But I think a little more detail is necessary, or at least helpful. That what I see contact to be, it's not simply that, like you're preparing an omelet, you put some egg, let's say, the way I used to prepare an omelet, you crack some eggs, put them in a bowl, and you cut up some mushrooms, put them in, cut up a piece of onion and put it in, cut up some green pepper and put it in, and mix it all together, then put it on the frying pan. Contact isn't a mixture like that. Or it's not like a mixture of, you want to make green paint and you take a little blue paint, mix a little red in, blue paint, yellow paint, and then you don't like that shade of green, you wanted a brighter shade of green, you mix in a little red. It's not a coming together like that, but rather, since we're speaking about doors, objects, and consciousness, so the way I understand contact to be the encounter of consciousness with the object through the sense door, through the sense faculty. So if we take the image of the door, the metaphor of the door, then consciousness goes out through the eye door to encounter forms. And when consciousness encounters forms through the eye door, that encounter is contact. Or reversing the image, when forms come in through the eye door, so that consciousness can get in touch with those forms, can know those forms, that initial encounter is contact. And so contact is a specific mental event. It's not merely the impingement of the sense object on the sense faculty. For example, many forms are sort of streaming in and impinging on the eye, but unless my consciousness goes to those forms and knows those forms in some way, there's no contact with those forms. Somebody might be calling my name in the distance, but I'm walking by. There might be the impingement of the sound, so I just take it to be, I don't even pay any attention to that sound. There's no contact. But when the consciousness goes out and actually, in a sense, touches that object, that is the event of contact. And so we then have 6 types of contact depending upon the sense base through which it occurs. Okay, now, you see in the passage I was reading earlier, it says, with dependent upon contact, there arises feeling. And now it seems to me that the Buddha is actually treating feeling here in the next section in a rather indirect but rather interesting and almost in an interesting way, which seems to be unique to this particular sutta. I don't recur this type of passage occurring in any other sutta, and that is in terms of what I've called, or what we've translated as mental exploration. The Pali word here is mano. Manupa vichara. And if any of you are familiar with Pali terminology, you know that vichara is one of the, we come across the word vichara in the standard jhana formulas as one of the factors that is present in the first jhana, or that's the factors that are used to develop jhana. So vichara has the sense of examination. And the commentary explains that here upavichara implies sort of the mutual or the collaborative functioning of vichara with vitaka. Vitaka is its sort of the twin, or maybe the older brother or sister of vichara. So the two often go together. So vitaka is the application of the mind to the object, and vichara is the examination of the object. And here it's called mano upavichara, because these are explorations that are done by the mind. And the text is speaking here about 18 kinds of mental exploration. And when we go through them, we could see why I said that this is an indirect way of introducing feeling into the discussion. Okay, so let's just go through them, and I've put them out schematically on the handout. So on seeing a form with the eye, okay, first there arises, based on the form and eye consciousness, the coming together of the three is eye contact. And now one explores a form productive of joy. One explores a form productive of, I don't like the word grief here, it's domanassa, which is mental displeasure. It could be sadness, sorrow, any degree of dejection, unhappiness, any kind of mental displeasure. And one explores a form productive of equanimity. Okay, then the same sort of threefold distinction is made with each of the other sense bases. Okay, till we come to on knowing a mind object with the mind. One explores a mind object productive of joy. One explores a mind object productive of displeasure. One explores a mind object productive of equanimity. And so we get 18 kinds of mental exploration by taking 6 kinds of exploration with joy, 6 kinds of exploration with grief, and 6 kinds of exploration with equanimity. And if we take this superficially, it seems to be distinguishing that there's one kind of form productive of joy, another kind of form productive of displeasure, another kind of form productive of equanimity. But actually the same object can belong to the 3 categories depending upon one's own subjective state. For example, we have a young man who has a newly formed girlfriend, a newly acquired girlfriend. Whenever he sees her, he sees her coming in the distance, he'll be looking on the lookout for her. Then he sees her coming in the difference. So then we could say that this is a form, so he's exploring a form productive of joy. Okay, so then this goes on for 6 months or so. Whenever he sees her, joy, joy, joy. You know what's coming next. We'll keep it clean. One day he goes into the city, maybe to buy some things, and he's walking down Broadway or 7th Avenue, and the movie theater lets out, and who does he see? Holding hands with another boy. Okay, now he sees her holding hands with another boy, and okay, the form productive of displeasure, maybe grief is appropriate here. And then he calls, at a later occasion, he calls her, I want to talk to you. They meet someplace. When he sees her, again, displeasure. Okay, then she says, Ralph, I'm sorry, but we have to break it off. I've met somebody else. Okay, then, the relationship is ended. And occasionally, he'll run across her on the street. Whenever he sees her, form productive of displeasure, sorrow, grief. But time goes on, and, what is the saying? Time is the remedy for all sorrows. Time heals all grief. So he develops indifference to her. And now he sees her arm in arm with the other boy, and the form productive of equanimity. He becomes a monk. He already did. And even the same object, can be productive of joy, productive of sorrow or displeasure, productive of equanimity. Like, when I was a teenager, I would put the rock and roll records on the phonograph, and I would be sort of jumping with joy, listening to them. Then my mother would come home and say, I can't stand that stuff. Can you turn it off? So for her, it's displeasure. Same music. And then my father would come home, and he's